I'd like to introduce you to Anu Adebajo of British Patient Capital, who will be moderating this session. Anu, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi.
Thank you. Fantastic. Great. So I'm going to introduce the panel and actually allow them to give their own intros. So we have Ling, we have Toby Koppel, and we've got Isabel Fox. So if I hand over maybe to you first, Toby, to introduce yourself.
Wonderful. Great to be here in person. Feels strange, but energizing. My name is Toby Koppel. I am the co-founder and partner of an early stage venture firm based in London called Mosaic Ventures. I've been investing and in building startups since 1995. I spent half my career in Silicon Valley and was part of some startups there, including Yahoo in the early days, and have been very involved in investing in deep tech over the last 10 or 12 years, including a number of machine learning based businesses, quite a number of crypto and blockchain businesses, and a space business. I was on the board of Virgin Galactic for a period. So that's me. Great to be here.
Thanks, Toby, and thanks for holding the fort for us in person whilst the rest of us are online. I'll hand over to you next, Isabel.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm general partner of Outsized Ventures. We focus on finding founders that essentially want to solve big problems in the world around human health, usually around C+ and Series A for us. And my background's been entrepreneur, some successes, some failures, lived in the Valley as well for a number of years, and really came back and focused on the deep tech space 5-6 years ago now, and still learning, to be honest. But, you know, it's great to see the sort of increased interest in deep tech now.
Great, thanks, Isabel. And then last but not least, over to you, Ling.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you all today. A few words about Tencent first. We are an internet-based technology firm listed on Hong Kong Stock Exchange from 2004. Best known for its messaging apps, QQ and WeChat. Each has about 1 billion users. And Tencent is one of the top 10 most valuable companies in the world. We have currently $750 billion market cap and around $74 billion revenue in 2020. We have over 1,000 investments across the world. For example, some of the notable investments in leading firms such as Vivendi, who owns Universal Music, Tesla, NIO, Spotify, Snapchat, Reddit, and the games firm Supercell in Finland. That was a $10 billion investment. In Europe, we focus primarily on deep tech areas such as AI, quantum, biotech, fintech, music, games, sustainability, including flying taxis. So similarly to Toby, we have invested in Lilium, so that's also flying. And a few words about myself. I am British and I am based in London. I joined Tencent about 5 years ago and have been leading Tencent's efforts in Europe, focusing on strategic investments and partnerships with tech startups and universities. Prior to Tencent, I spent the initial part of my career, 10 to 15 years or so, working in university research in Oxford University and Imperial College, focusing on quantum computing research.
Fantastic, thanks very much, Ling. And I'll just give a quick intro to myself as well. So I'm Anu Adebajo, I'm a senior investment manager at British Patient Capital. We invest in best-of-class venture and growth capital funds, and we have a $2.5 billion investment program to do so. But we also are in the process of launching Future Fund Breakthrough, which will invest into innovative R&D intensive companies, which will include some deep tech companies too. So I've been in the industry for about 9 years on both the GP side and the LP side. So I've invested directly into deep tech companies, but also into deep tech funds. So I'm going to go into our first question then. So Toby, I'm going to hand this over to you. If you could just explain what deep tech is to you and what sectors you consider to be part of it and what sectors you don't consider to be part of it.
Sure, it's a good question given this topic is it a year of deep tech? So first of all, I don't like the term deep tech. I've never liked it. It's a very vague term. It actually doesn't really, it's not very clear what it means. And in fact, I worry that it gets people to focus much more on the technology for its own sake rather than actually how the technology solves customers' problems. So I want to sort of caveat the fact that I'm not a big fan of the name itself. I much prefer to talk about the problems that we can solve in the world and which technologies we can use to solve that with specifically. So we'll start with that as background. At the same time, to me, deep tech is part of much of the world that we already engage with. Google is one of the biggest deep tech businesses in the whole world, and look at the investments they've made. We're in King's Cross. We're in DeepMind's building actually. So AlphaFold, AlphaGo, were developed by people in this building that we're in right now. They're probably the largest investor in machine intelligence, machine learning technologies. So, to me, it's a set of technologies that often are actually pervasive and probably invisible, and it should be invisible to most people because we should be focusing again on the customer problems. Other examples of I think more well-known deep tech are OpenAI that recently launched their GPT-3 language model, which is incredibly exciting for the future of adapting these new language models and using NLP technology again to solve problems. So I think that's one of the most exciting areas, but it's a big area again around machine intelligence, machine learning. There are other areas, again, I'm going to connect it sort of in life sciences. CRISPR-Cas9 is a new technology that's being deployed in lots of different businesses, and I think that's another example of deep tech. And we talked about space tech already. So those are some of the real life examples. The broader categories, again, you can go down a very long list. Space, blockchain and crypto is an area that we invest very heavily in. We've got one of the biggest crypto companies in the world, blockchain.com, is in our portfolio. That they are developing, and they've got a very large team of cryptographers and security programmers that are trying to build these distributed ledger technologies. That's a key segment. We also we as a firm are very active in what we call machine intelligence, so using machine learning for powering enterprise software companies. That's a category that is large and growing, and I think in Europe we're seeing some tremendous companies being built on top of that, of machine learning. AI-driven life sciences is another category, using machine learning to either discover drugs or targets, for example. Other categories, Ling talked about quantum. She's the expert on quantum. I won't dare to talk about it when she's in the room. But clearly that's a category that's, I think, fits in just because it's one that does require significant R&D investment and time. And then there are categories that I would argue that are closer to hardware. What I've just described are primarily software-oriented businesses, which again tends to be where we focus. So that's what we think about. But there are hardware businesses, there are semiconductor businesses that are companies like Graphcore in Bristol that's obviously building out graphics chips. There's advanced materials. There's lots of focus today around climate, sustainability, and newer materials. That's more what we think of as hardware. And I think some of the space technologies are also involved significant investment in hardware. So it's quite a long list of categories. It tends to represent a type of company that has a large technology development phase of R&D well before they get to solve the customer problems. And so they tend to have a lot of science risk, a lot of engineering risk, as well as product market fit risk, whereas most software companies that you'll see VCs investing in Europe have primarily product market fit risk. There's not a lot of engineering risk in the product itself. So I think those are probably the biggest categories and how I would to answer that question.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Toby, very comprehensive. Ling, I don't know if you want to add anything there, but also if you would like to also talk about your views on and your thoughts on the areas of deep tech in Europe that interest you the most.
Yeah, I think I echo Toby. I think it's a hugely exciting time for deep tech in Europe at the moment. One of the most exciting areas right now for us is biotech, in particular genomics. Actually, it has been in the past 4 or 5 years. And some of our invested portfolio companies, in particular Oxford Nanopore, have made great contributions to solving society's challenges in the last few years, especially when COVID hit us in 2020. And Nanopore has built and deployed rapid portable gene sequencing technology far ahead of the market. And that has helped sequence COVID variants quickly and very rapidly. So what I really like about that is the model where deep tech has been applied to a real society problem of COVID in a dramatic, impactful way. So we're not just doing deep tech to build some cool technology, we're making a real impact on society's most challenging problems. Another nanopore applications that's a fairly recent one is sequencing of brain tumors. Nanopore have been trialing sequencing of brain tissue during operations when surgeons are doing them, so close to real time, around 100 minutes rather than days or weeks, which are currently takes. And as you can see widely reported in the news, Nanopore is planning for an IPO in London this year, since we're on the from startup to IPO stage. So I thought I would mention that. I think that as a theme generally for 2021, as the world looks for ways to recover from the pandemic, deep tech needs to think about how it can apply itself to real world use cases that do make a huge difference. So very similar to what Toby just mentioned.
Great, fantastic. I think we're just going to shift slightly now to kind of capital supply here. And Isabel, I've got a question for you on your thoughts about capital supply to deep tech at different stages and how the UK compares to the US.
Yeah, look, I think it's always getting better. We've got more and more people, funds looking now at deep tech, whether that's family offices and institutions, but we still naturally have a gap. You know, after Series A, around the Series B, it gets quite tough to find enough capital in the UK to fund all of the startups. And that is changing. I mean, obviously with Tencent and US VCs, Sequoia obviously have just put someone on the ground in the UK. We are seeing more international funds coming in, but we still need to do more.
Yeah. Has anyone else, Toby, Ling, any comments on
Sure.
on capital supply?
I think if you look at the data, there's roughly 40 billion euros, pounds that goes annually into venture in Europe at the moment. It's been growing tremendously in the last year in particular, but of that, roughly 20 to 25% a year is coming from deep tech if you look over the last 3 or 4 years. And that's up from around 10%. 10 years ago. I think in 2010 it was roughly 10%. So it's been tremendous growth in how much capital is going into deep tech in Europe. I think that's testament to the quality of the science that's coming out of the universities here, and the real emphasis the governments and other organizations are putting behind it, and the appetite obviously of the venture community. So I think we've made a tremendous progress around deep tech. We've seen some significant companies build. I think I was looking at some data in preparation for this, but the total market cap of sort of the deep tech companies out there is something like 180 billion euros today. If you look across like BioNTech, which has had a very big year, UiPath, for example, that went public, Darktrace has gone public. So when you add up the market cap of all these companies, that's quite a significant market cap. We're getting close to 200 billion euros. So yeah, I think we're starting to see some significant value creation that I think is then likely to lead to a greater appetite on the part of the venture community to back these companies, because if you go back 10 years, that market cap was much, much smaller. So I think that's likely to lead to a change, an acceleration is my guess. However, most venture firms are have people with qualifications that are typically in finance or business. I would argue, if you look at the backgrounds of the partners and the rest of the teams at venture firms, it's very few people have the technical expertise to evaluate a deep tech company. There are exceptions, of course. Ling is one exception. Siraj at Atomico, or Saranga at Balderson. I mean, there are people clearly. I don't just pick on those, but there are others. But it's not. If you look at how many technical degrees there are per venture firm, I would say it's you can count them on one hand. So I think that does hold these firms back, because we don't have the capability to truly evaluate and have the expert network as well to help in that due diligence. I think that will change as we're seeing more exit value getting created, but there needs to be real focus by venture firms in hiring that and developing that type of expertise, hiring people who have more of an academic or science background, but who also have a business instinct to be able to become an investor. And that's something that we are committed to doing, and we've been have been hiring those folks, and it's a journey.
Yeah, Ling, your name was mentioned there. What are your thoughts on what Toby said about the kind of expertise gap in terms of deep tech investing?
Yeah, I think the talent is a great point that Toby just addressed. But we do see there is fantastic ecosystem across all the leading universities in Europe, say Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, UCL, Edinburgh, Glasgow, or even further beyond in the continent, Sweden, Italy, France, and the Nordic regions is where we invest a lot. For example, IQM is a superconducting quantum computer we invested. Another example, for example, one of our portfolio companies I really like is Vaccitech. That they spun out of Oxford University in 2016, and then this year they just IPO'd in Nasdaq in April. So, and the two co-founders, Professor Sarah Gilbert and Adrian Hill, have just been knighted on Queen's birthday. So I think that's a great example of university, public, and private sectors collaboration. And so just as context, Vaccitech is the company behind the COVID Oxford vaccine. And what they are doing is they build a reusable biotech platform using the ChAdOx prime and the booster mechanism that can be adapted for other diseases such as HBV, HPV, and prostate cancer. But finally, just on that talent point, we do find ourselves in our team, we're hiring more and more of deep tech experts with PhDs from leading universities, for example, in biotech, in quantum, in AI, etc.
Great, thank you. I want to talk about LPs and their interest in deep tech. We're seeing an increase in that. As an LP, British Patient Capital are increasingly interested in that sector as well, in that area. Why do you think that is? And Isabel, I'll ask you first.
Certainly last year, I think it was a major shift. I mean, we started investing in deep tech back in 2015, and there were some family offices that were interested, but it was still difficult. And as Toby said, the stats on how much got invested into the UK, into the deep tech, was still minimum in comparison to consumer, mobile, and e-commerce. And that really shifted last year for us. And I think partly it goes back to what Ling and Toby have said earlier, which is finally seeing sort of deep tech applied to society's needs. And suddenly, why do we need diagnostics? Why do we need to be able to find vaccines quickly? Everything came to the forefront with people suddenly realizing that it can be applied, and it can be applied quickly to society's needs and to hopefully improve our world. And I think that was a big shift for people. They suddenly got the importance of some of the life sciences, the stuff that's happening in drug targeting, drug discovery, and it suddenly had a real reason to exist. And so we certainly have seen a bigger appetite from angels, family offices, institutions, obviously the British Business Bank. And I think that will just continue to increase. We're going to see exponential growth. There's so many big problems to solve in the world, and we're only at the start of that. And as Ling said, genomics is one of the big areas for us as well that we see great opportunity. We're just starting that. Like, yes, Oxford Nanopore has been a great success, but there's going to be plenty more that comes out in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think that's finally what people have started to realize.
Yeah, and I think to that point, as you mentioned, British Patient Capital, we're very interested in this area, and actually are in the process of launching a feature fund breakthrough, which is a 375 million UK-wide scheme, which invests into kind of R&D intensive businesses. I think for us, it's that recognition that there is a lot of science and talent that can be harnessed in the UK, and to the earlier point about kind of the capital requirements, but also the capital that's raised here, kind of at the early stage, the UK deep tech companies, US deep tech companies have similar funding rates, but then that starts to diverge in subsequent rounds, and so US rounds are 1.8 times larger on average, and by the first round, and that kind of increases to 4.5 times by round 6. So I think kind of being able to provide capital to support the future growth of these deep tech companies and provide their capital needs later is really important.
And we're seeing across, Innovate UK as well. Obviously, with my council hat on, as you know, it's a big push for the government to fund the future, and it's super important as we move forward.
Yeah, fantastic. And Toby, if there's anything you want to add here, maybe on the appetite of investors more generally, rather than just LPs.
I think what drives the interest of investors is returns. I mean, that is still the core driver. So when LPs see a company like Cruise Automation that sells for billions, they see a Palantir's IPO. It was a bit rocky, but they've had several good quarters. I mean, that's looking like a great return for those investors. So UiPath, I mentioned, Darktrace. I mean, again, the list goes on, and that's what the LPs care about. I mean, they care, of course, personally about society and the impact can happen, but at the same time they have to be good stewards of capital, as do the venture firms. And so I think the more of these successes that we can have, I think that will drive more capital into the sector. But at the same time, we have to be patient. These companies do take longer to build. They need more capital up front to get through the R&D phase. I mean, building a new machine learning application, it's not like building a new SaaS product. It takes often 3 years of R&D, at least $10 million, I would say, just to get to a product that's compelling in the market, where you've got proprietary data you've learned with the early customers, and you've been able to demonstrate real business value, not just technical value. And I think that's what for a VC, if they're thinking about, I can invest in a 15-minute grocery delivery service. I know how that works. There's no science risk. The product market fit's been proven. That's an easy bet to make today. We wouldn't make it, but others are making it. And compared with, let me invest in a new machine learning application that's going to give superpowers to procurement teams, which is one of the companies we've invested in Ireland called Kilvar. I mean, that's taken them 5 years to prove that technology, but it's incredible. There's a data moat there. There's a technical moat that people will not catch up. But you have to have that patience and that horizon. And we're very fortunate. We have LPs that are very long-term oriented and are patient. And as long as they feel like the money is compounding for them, they're happy to. If it takes 10 years or 12 years or 15 years, they're happy.
Great. I'm going to ask all of you this question. We've touched on some of these various groups already, and so what I wanted to know is what you think investors, founders, and governments, or how they should collaborate over the next 10 years for the benefit of deep tech. If I go to you first, Ling, and then we'll open up to everybody.
Yeah, I think in Europe, we already see lots of good examples of ecosystems already between investors, founders, universities in particular, and the governments. For example, Anu, you represent British Patient Capital. So where innovation is coming from all of these places. And we ourselves have invested in areas, as mentioned, quantum AI, spun out of leading universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, or Aalto universities in Finland, or University of Vienna in Austria, as well as some of them, as Toby mentioned, the longer term flying taxi, while we have regulatory approvals in place in a few years' time, it can potentially shift the paradigm of transport. So I think there's already really strong ecosystem of collaboration between all the universities, investors, founders, and governments. And I think that approach can continue. The area needs to develop and can be supported is the focus subjects and the fields, in my view. To return to the theme I was talking about earlier, loosely termed as tech for society good or solving society challenges, I think some of the areas and fields of most interest, most obvious common grounds between governments, universities, and investors are areas such as sustainability, where governments, of course, have a large interest in making sure that there are carbon neutral technologies as we move forward. So I think the government should choose the fields really carefully, focus on areas such as sustainability to help drive collaborations, especially some of these fields. They require extremely large upfront capital investment, very heavy in infrastructure. If we look at Northvolt for batteries, or some of the vertical farms, each of the farm costs could be $50 million or $100 million. And we are particularly interested in sustainability in Tencent's DNA. And in 2021, we have set up a whole new business group called Social Sustainable Value after actual years of planning. So this is an area we actively look to partner with universities, investors, and British patient capital like yourself as we move forward. And I think it's really timely given Glasgow will be hosting COP26 later this year.
Yeah, and Isabel, I know that collaboration is something that you're very big on with kind of both your hats. Do you want to add anything here?
No, I think Ling summed it up really well. But it is. I think we've got the start of it with the collaboration with government, LPs, the institutions, VCs. But we're growing. We're at the early stages of what the potential can be here, and so it's just a matter of continuing what we're all doing.
Suggest that certainly on the university spin-out front, I think it's still incredibly painful for founders to be able to take a company and spin out IP into it. I think if you compare with the US university system, where it's a very straightforward sort of patent royalty system, they've got benchmarks and comps, and they don't try to overreach and grab large shares of the cap table. They let the founders and the academics to be much freer to go out and build a business. And I think there's just tremendous amount of friction that's caused because of these licensing offices in the universities in the UK as well as across Europe. We've experienced it, and there's so much brain damage as an investor that you have to go through in order to affect some of those spinouts that we won't, we're not willing to invest that time just given the probability of being successful. So I think that is an area that needs to be addressed. And if I was, obviously universities are quite independent, and they have a very, often very insular culture, and they make change happens very slowly. So I'm not suggesting it's going to be easy, but to me that is an important area to explore, particularly when a lot of that research is being funded by the government. They should be motivated to see it get out into the hands of the teams that can go build companies around it. so that's the first comment. My second comment is a lot of these academics, they're phenomenal scientists, but they are not often great CEOs building businesses. And so finding the right commercial talent to pair up with the academics is a real challenge. And I think there's no easy answer to that one, but finding better ways and trying to develop ecosystems where you're starting to pair up and create almost co-founder dating services. Entrepreneur First does this. That was one of the things they started out with their mission to do. I'm on the board there. I think they've done a really good job with that. But I think we need to see that more of that type of collaboration between folks who can really help build these businesses that come with the right commercial experience alongside the scientists.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll open it up to questions from the audience. So continue to send your questions through to us. So the last question is, where do you see the most opportunities, the most deep tech opportunities in the next 5 years? And that can be sectors, themes, whatever you like. And I'll start with you, Toby.
Oh, okay. Well, look, two of our core themes are machine intelligence and sort of blockchain and crypto, and those are the areas that we believe we're going to see the most exciting businesses built. Machine learning, as we've discussed, it's a technology. It's not a solution in and of itself. So finding real customer problems and building a product that's not that thinks about how can the customer take advantage of the technology and deploy and move the needle for them in their business, whether it's reducing costs or accelerating revenue. There's so many interesting applications across different industries, different verticals, different functions. So we've got a company called Verif that's in the ID verification space, using computer vision to help verify people's identities for all types of applications. There's huge amounts of growth from that business in the last 12 months because everyone was remote. They had to verify their identity, and you couldn't walk into any physical location to do that. And so that's an example. We've got a company that's got put dash cams in cars and is collecting amazing data on what's happening on streets all over the world. And it's all cloud connected. It's deep learning on the device. We think the whole world of sort of autonomy and edge applications, edge computing, deep learning at the edge with computer vision. There's some very interesting applications there. We've invested in a drone operating system that very low cost autonomous drones for different applications, whether it's delivery of medicines, of surveying farms for climate issues or plant disease. So these sort of this is all machine learning at the edge, machine learning enterprise software, which I've discussed. And then in the crypto side, we believe the whole financial system can be rewired by a decentralized approach to building a trust layer that way. And whether it's in DeFi or in some of the more traditional Bitcoin based technologies, we're very excited about the potential to turn financial services upside down and potentially take all assets onto a distributed ledger. And that will involve a huge amount of research and development to make that happen.
And great, I'll open that up to anybody else. Isabel, Ling.
Yeah, so continuing on Toby's theme, we're also quite interested in areas such as mental and physical wellness. And particular area of fun and excitement we're exploring is metaverse or virtual world and gamified fitness. So we have co-invested with Outsized Ventures in a seed stage startup called Quell, where consumers can wear a gauntlet and fight through a fantasy world. Of course, then there are a lot of innovation in digital healthcare or telehealth in Europe. High valuations we can see for Babylon, but also really interesting digital health providers in Sweden, France, Germany, such as Cree and Dr. Lib, Doctor, etc. So I think Europe is very well positioned to see further innovation in digital health. And another area for us is to look at the interface between fintech and sustainability. We recently, a year ago, we invested in an early stage startup called Amfuse, and they are providing card payment with my carbon action as added function, like a value add. So consumers, they could track their carbon spending when they spend money. And it was featured as one of the front covers of The Economist magazine last year. And also founded by two amazing female tech founders. So I think to balance out the gender diversity or diversity in general in entrepreneurship is something we're actively supporting as well.
Yeah, and
Great.
for us, it's the same really. It's around human health and empowerment of the consumer to take care of their health and well-being, including the food that they eat, and also planetary health. I mean, that's our two big pushes.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to go to some of the audience questions now. So the first one here is about thoughts on quantum technology, and maybe Ling, I'll hand that one over to you. And I know that we've been seeing a lot in our underlying portfolio, especially actually the kind of software layer. But on the other hand, a lot of people are still quite skeptical about kind of where things are and how advanced they really are, and kind of how much further there is to go. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on quantum.
I think when I started my PhD almost 15, 20 years ago, every year when people was asking me, when do you think quantum computing can be a reality? I always said 5 years. And it's been so many years that has passed. I think complementary to Anu, your approach, which are looking at a lot of quantum software, we actually started looking at quantum hardware because we felt at the time we started in around early 2017 to look at the space and looked at across the spectrum of various quantum hardware technologies ranging from superconducting ion traps and photonics, silicon, electron spins, nanomaterials, even this these particles might run anions which don't exist yet. So, and then we are very much taking a portfolio approach, looking at quantum hardware investment, and sometimes it's just pure donation for university research. And then this year, I think we are starting to look at some of the innovations in software space. Lots of my classmates from Oxford in my research group, they have all actually started their own quantum startups. And for example, Horizon Quantum in Singapore, and they can translate any classical programming language into a quantum programming language, or Riverlane in Cambridge, as well as the new announcement for Honeywell this week. They are investing $300 million and to set up a new quantum lab together with Cambridge Quantum Computing. So we do see some of the best talents in Europe, and given Oxford is almost like the birthplace of the modern day quantum computing.
Fantastic, thanks for that. I'm going to just ask one last question. We've got about a minute, but I definitely wanted to touch on this. How do we try and eliminate data bias in kind of deep tech and I suppose data intensive industries? I think we've seen a lot kind of come out about this, and there are kind of several books that have been written on this topic, and just be really interested to hear your thoughts. But as we're building these deep tech companies of the future, how do we make sure that they aren't inherently biased, due to often the coding reasons, the founders themselves not necessarily having to take into account a whole wider variety of inputs? What are your thoughts on this? Toby, you were nodding, so I'm going to go to you first.
Well, I think you addressed some of the issues. You need a diverse team to be working on this that understands the end customer and who we're dealing with. I'm on the board of the Oxford Internet Institute that's been doing a lot of research in this area and has made a lot of policy recommendations to governments around the world on this. They've got a professor of information ethics there. So there's actually a lot of academic research that's been done around this topic and how do we address it. It is something that through explainability regulations, I think is starting to actually permeate the industry where you can't be a black box. You're going to actually have to explain why a decision was made, and that's actually going to board level, and it was requiring the certain type of technical approaches, I think, that are different from the black boxes that a lot of companies have been developing, and it provides much more transparency. And so we'll shine light on these data biases. So I think that's a big part. And GDPR, in fact, is actually what was well designed to take account of this issue. But it's a real one, and all founders and CEOs need to be very aware of it.
Fantastic. On that note, I am going to wrap up here, but thank you very much to Isabel, Ling and Toby for joining me on this panel, and thank you very much for watching, everybody out there.